Welcome back, everyone. This is Mark Fairhurst from Mercatus, and I'm joined by my good colleague, friend, um, interlocutor. That's a big word for you, David. I know.
Yeah, I'm gonna
David
have to look
Bishop
that
from Brick Meets Click.
gonna have to look that one up, Mark.
Okay.
So we talked about mixing it up a little bit this month to give the viewers a little flavor, if you will, right? So why don't you tell them
Yeah.
what's going to go on?
Well, this is your revenge moment because apparently there was a question I asked you last month, and you didn't have the answer, and it was earth shattering.
Oh. So I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, with a little bit of back envelope math, I can kind of come to that.
So.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I didn't have the answer or if I just wasn't prepared to share it with
Ah,
you.
ah. Okay.
So,
So we're going to flip the script on
yeah.
for this month.
Yeah.
And
So let's just if okay, Mark, we'll just kind of get going.
sure, absolutely.
So I thought we'd start with the top line. It end of June, obviously the full month. June was down just over 1% year over year.
Hmm.
And because we're at the halfway mark for the year, we did look at the year to date, which is the question you asked last month prematurely, because why would you ask that in May? So year to date, we're down just about 2%. Now, that's kind of in line with our general expectations, as you know, Mark, with our forecast. And if we exclude the ship to home, because not every grocer has that, pickup and delivery are still are up just under
Yep.
1% for the month, but essentially flat year to date. So what I was wondering, Mark, since you really are in the trenches working directly with a lot of retailers like ourselves, but in a different capacity,
Hmm.
I'm just curious from your standpoint, you know, how are grocers responding to kind of this new slow or no growth environment? I know there's going to be different markets there, but are you seeing anything with the retailers either you work with or you talk with relative to how the conditions are this year versus in the past few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would
If you
say
don't
that
if you don't know, Mark, that's fine. It's a
in,
good
in,
question, but
insert screeching car sound
yeah.
here. Um, no, that's so. In the conversations we're having, we're not seeing any pullback, any reluctance. If anything, what we are seeing and experiencing is a desire to double down on first party platforms. There is definitely a strong interest in curbside pickup, and the conversations are relating to uh, engagement and conversion, and in particular, uh, finding elements and paths to augment the experience so that customers are incentivized to purchase more.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good response, Mark. I'll give you a passing grade on that. We're just going to go pass fail. Okay, no real grades
Hey,
here.
I,
So
I I've never graded your responses.
yeah, fair enough, fair enough. I just brought it up. So,
Revenge
but
is a
you
dish
brought
best served cold.
yeah. Okay, well you are such the literary fool, so I'll leave that alone. But you touched on a lot of the things that I was thinking about asking you. So let me just kind of hit
Mm-hmm.
on one. So it was pickup, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing whether you call it strength or resilience this year with pickup, and again, we've been very uh, bullish on pickup for several years because of really the dynamics that it provides and the value it can offer both the retailer and the customer. And again, if we look at the year to date numbers for pickup, I mean it's
Mm-hmm.
up over 1%, while at the same time delivery is down 2%. Uh, if we were to exclude, you know, ship to home from the total sales share, pickup is 55% of the business. And as you're looking at this, you're talking about retailers kind of doubling down on pickup. We know that a lot of retailers first went online with delivery.
Yeah,
Can you talk
at
about
the
what
regional level, right?
the regional level,
Yeah.
what the retailers that you're seeing or interacting with are doing to kind of, so to speak, double down on pickup.
Making sure they have the right picking solution. I think they're looking at the total operational cost. So it's, you know, the facilities, the parking arrangements, pick path, in order to optimize the experience for their associates. They also want the geolocation technology, so it's easy to notify in-store associates as to when customers are coming up. They want more flexibility in time slots. There is interest in variable time slots based on fee level. But at the same time, I think they're getting pressure from the 3PLs for this. Surprisingly, the instant delivery model is still very much alive, and promises are being made that you'll be able to generate more revenue if you cater to this demand for immediate 1 hour delivery. When our research, collectively, has shown that you're able to retain customers for a lower cost on the customer side, and a lower cost operationally if you offer next day for lower fee. So there's a lot of cross currents happening with the retailers right now, and they're looking for direction.
And I know it's understandable that, if they were working with or partnering with a 3PL before on delivery, and now they've moved into pickup like some of your clients have, the 3PL is kind of trying to keep their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, right?
Especially given the shift away from delivery.
Right, and you talked about picking solutions and the geolocation services. Where do you sense most regional grocers are turning to kind of get information or guidance as to how to move forward? I mean, we're seeing, and I mention that because I see significant presence of 3PL in that pickup space, which is somewhat interesting given that really the retailers ideally should own the entire process from ordering through distribution, right?
The 3PLs are in the mix simply because of the labor issue, right? It's hiring and retaining the talent that would be picking the orders in store. Some retailers, I mean, it's an entry level position, and there's a lot of churn, and therefore you need technology that is instructive for the pick process and easy to use. And so there's a strong emphasis on workflow.
Right. So if it's an entry level position and the person's not going to be in the position that long because of high churn, so you really want to kind of have a quick learning curve to get them up to speed, to have the productivities that you want. Is it that issue that's motivating some retailers to say, hey, 3PL has an attractive service? Or is it also, well, if I have to do it, I then need the technology, in terms of picking and packing practices to support that if I did it myself?
Yeah, and there's exactly. I mean, there's costs, pros and cons, right? Retailers tend to look at it in different budget brackets. So if you're asking them to look at the total cost of ownership of a 1P, they may be looking at licensing and integrations as one element, but not considering the capital expenses that are required to support as online as part of the entire ownership option for e-commerce. I think the 3PLs, there's variability there. Instacart has a very advanced picking solution. Other 3PLs, there's still reliance on single order pick per shopper. Or gig shopper.
Do you know? And sorry for interrupting, but do you know in terms of the kind of the payment structure? Is it pay as you go in terms of a cost per order, or is this another percent that's added on top of the commissions they discussed? Do you have any visibility or understanding in terms of how retailers and 3PLs are working through that? Because we obviously know through the custom research Mercatus is publishing, the cost to pick, pack, and distribute a pickup order is not insignificant. And then the question is, well, how do you control that cost and bring it down? And clearly, at least from our perspective, we see first party having a a greater ability to manage those costs down by utilizing their own resources, which would include the technology.
Or at least a mix, a mix of resources. So,
Right.
so there may be hybrid pick models, pick for delivery, pick for in-store staging, and they use their own associates for retrieval because they still want to have the brand be the lead in the customer receipt of the order.
Is there in terms of considerations, if we just think of volume, for instance, volume, orders per day, orders per week, whatever it may be, that a retailer should have in order to kind of make the shift to in-house, right? Using their own labor and, sourcing, an effective picking solution that could help them deliver that finished, basket to the customer in the parking lot at a lower landed cost as opposed to whatever they're paying the 3PL.
Yeah, we've typically used this 40 orders per day per store threshold. We have our own integrated picking technology. We also partner with some of the more advanced picking solutions in the market to offer retailers that flexibility. 3PLs as well partner in some cases to integrate others' picking technology to handle that volume. It's again, that's why it's so important to have the strategy and the partnership of a good e-com provider, because there's a lot of complexity here, and that's because the retailers are demanding it to meet market conditions.
Then this may be kind of a silly question, and it's not confined to just regional grocers, but are there grocers that you're aware of, whether you work with them or not, that are just doing a manual pick without any kind of advanced picking solution to kind of aid the pick path, or ideally allow them to batch out multiple orders together? Are there any retailers, I'm assuming they may be smaller in scale, but just in general, any kind of observations on that?
Yeah, I think there's
and then I should add that I should add, Mark, I'm sorry, but you were too slow in your response. There may be others that have contracted with, or quote unquote have these advanced picking solutions. Then the question is, are they really using them, right?
Yeah.
So two-part question. Go ahead.
You're right. I mean, the smaller retailers tend to use the single order pick option with handoff to delivery, and they're using their in-store associates to do that picking from the store. The larger retailers, and again, it's a volume game, are utilizing a mix. They would, in some stores they would use one 3PL, and others they'll use another 3PL. Or inject that into, again, some other stores that may be lower volume, they'll use their own associates. So there's a lot of complexity there. What was your second question? Sorry.
For those that have subscribed or purchased those picking solutions, whether it's yours or someone else's, can you talk to, just because you have it doesn't mean you're using it properly. Are there kind of watch outs or learnings that you've seen relative to retailers who just simply secure the resource but maybe don't implement it and execute it as fully as or as optimally as possible?
Yeah, I think there's without mentioning or calling out anybody in particular, certainly the batch picking functionality is a large component to the features that are being utilized, but others like SMS communication, because you don't have the telephone numbers of your customers in your CRM, is problematic. And then zone picking is really dependent on it being a larger facility, a larger store. That efficiency typically is not being utilized. So
gotcha.
In the way that these solutions are sold, you're unless you're able to negotiate, different thresholds to the feature sets, you could be buying a solution that is architected to be so much more than what you're using, and you're paying the price for it.
Gotcha. So the good news is there's room to grow into it, and there's an opportunity to better leverage that resource. And again, I
Right.
think the custom research you guys are publishing now talks indirectly about how that can happen through some of the pricing levers.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so let me change the gears. You talked about winning and retaining and building engagement with customers. I'm going to first talk about attracting, and then we'll get to the topic of retention and kind of maintaining that engagement. What we've seen in the monthly data, looking just at the month of June, we have approximately 12% of the U.S. households that you would consider either light or lapsed users, as the most recent time they purchased groceries online was
Mm-hmm.
2 to 3 months ago, right? So that's not ideal in a high frequency kind of purchase cycle that we generally would have with groceries. So if you're trying to build your base business, obviously you can compete to get any customer, but how are you seeing, or how should retailers be attempting to win back or attract some of these lighter or lapsed users who maybe had a bad experience at a competitor, or
Mm-hmm.
who aren't necessarily uh, experiencing the promises of online shopping yet?
Yeah, I think it's what you're looking at is the entire marketing
Right.
workflow here. So it's about, first of all, do you have the information on your customers? What's in your CRM? Do you know what their purchase behavior is? Are you focusing more on digital coupons and incentives that require a big spend, but at the same time are enticing, for lack of a better term, cherry pickers who
Right.
will take advantage of those deals, but not necessarily are the core to your customer base.
So I was trying to find some stuff here. I have all these mailers. You remember
Yep.
I've showed you before. I
Yep.
have
Direct
some
mail.
retailer. Yeah, I have some direct mail pieces in here. You can see this one is Kroger.
I thought you were going
Um,
to pull out fan mail.
well, yeah, that's a different pile. It's in the garbage can right now, but
Okay.
I have to just sort it. But how are retailers trying to reach maybe that new customer that isn't already in their CRM,
Yeah.
right?
I,
Who hasn't used their service,
I
but
think that
is in their
a lot, a
market
lot,
and maybe in play?
a lot of top line, above the line advertising. So the radio, TV, social media. Um, some customers are ramping up in terms of hiring uh, significant talent to join their team and focusing more on developing content. So very very specific B2C marketing tactics, um, which should translate into more engagement if they're directing their customers to the right properties, and that message is consistent across channel and repetitive. But
Gotcha.
it's often very difficult to compete with 3PLs who bid on your Google search terms, for example. And
Yeah.
I know that happens quite often, and directs traffic to the 3PL's property as opposed to the 1P.
Yeah, I know I've heard firsthand from retailers who have requested, to use that word lightly, that the 3PL cease and desist that practice, because the idea of front running the retailer and grabbing their traffic, that's a guerrilla tactic for sure. And if it's a retailer that's a partner of yours, that becomes a little more dicey to
Right.
manage. So without question, and it's interesting, we're hearing in the trade press right now about Prime Day and what Amazon's going to offer in the stores. Now,
Yep.
I'm in Chicago, and we have a range of Amazon Fresh stores still operating in this market. And I have to say, from a consumer standpoint, I haven't seen any of the messaging, either in digital or radio or cable, that would be, promoting the fact that they're offering, 20% off orders in store, over $50, and on
Mm-hmm.
Prime Day, I think it's a 25% discount. So it's really interesting, or maybe indicative of the challenge of reaching the target, because here I am, I'm very aware of these things. And when they appear, I generally take notice just because of what we do. Um, are there ways to work around those challenges, that maybe we haven't thought of from a retail standpoint? Or is it, to your point, just it's frequency, it's repetition?
I think it's repetition, it's frequency, but it's also targeting. It's my background. I'm a B2B marketer primarily, and it's all of, you want an efficient use of your spend. You have to know where your customers are, and you have to know when to deliver the right message. But with the retailer on the B2C side, I mean, they have to go wide, but they should also go narrow. And if that's and utilizing zip code analysis data to understand where their customers are, and combining digital with the old fashioned marketing techniques. We haven't even talked about retailers stopping the print circular. We had one large one on the East Coast who made that decision and then rescinded it. So it's some things die hard.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're in a transitionary period where experimentation, goes both ways, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
a lesson learned. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. Now, I told you I was going to then also hit on retention, or based on engagement. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we look at in the monthly is that likelihood to use the service again within the next 30 days. And where we're at today, June versus year ago, we're kind of at the same level, about 62% intent rate. But we're still over 10 percentage points lower than what we were pre-COVID. And part
Mm-hmm.
of that may be an artifact that, believe it or not, there are still people online who may not have the same conviction about shopping online due to concerns about COVID, as hard as that is believe, or some other circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
But, that just reinforces the challenge we have with, once we've spent the money and made and targeted to attract that new customer, how do we, build meaningful engagement enough to ensure that that first timer, who maybe has about a 50% chance of repeating, continues to go to the third, the second, the third, and then eventually the fourth order, where we see intent rates close to 90% again. What are some of the kind of tactics that you're seeing or suggesting that would help retailers build that meaningful engagement, that would create a level of stickiness, that would help kind of increase the likelihood to come back and use that service again in the next month?
Yeah. I, there's a number of options they can take. It's as a technology provider, making sure that your experience is easy to use, that's easy to quickly build a basket or to repeat a previous order, personalize that experience so that the customer feels that the retailer, by extension the platform, knows who they are, and makes that positioning relevant deals and options in front of customers. Streamlining the basket building process, so it's not cumbersome. Offering multiple payment options, preloaded with contact and credit card information is another one. Sending follow-up communication, confirming orders, integrating other means of communication like SMS into your notification practices. But then once the order gets transferred to the assembly stage of the process, making sure that if there's out of stocks, that you're able to communicate what those out of stocks are,
Right.
and asking for substitutions, or identifying recommended substitutions. So it's every step along that order assembly distribution process that you've outlined several times, it's important to put yourself in the customer's shoes and how you would want to be notified or informed of the status of your order.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about listening to you, you talked about personalized search results, either through my personal use of online shopping or my professional, where we've audited many retailers that we've also shopped with. I've just found it incredibly helpful that when I search for something, let's say it's milk, if I had purchased milk before,
Mm-hmm.
the first item comes back, buy again, this item, right? And I think intuitively that makes a lot of sense, especially in a generic search. I think the other, from just a consumer standpoint, at least, I'm speaking as a consumer now or a customer, is on the distribution function of pickup, right? Which is, okay, I've done all that. You made it easy on the ordering side. The assembly, you've communicated to me what's available, what's not. It's ready. Now I come to the store, and it's like the moment of truth. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
crossing the finish line. I was at a store today, and I saw the guy at a regional retailer just standing outside his car waiting for his pickup to come. I don't know how long he was there for, but put that in contrast to what we see in mass. We rarely, if ever, see someone stand outside their car. Now, it could be indicative of a longer wait time and they're just wondering where the heck they are, or it could be they're opening the back door as opposed to the trunk. I don't know, but I think that element is so critical because it's the last kind of moment of truth, if you will, right?
Exactly.
So, well,
Well,
Mark, yeah.
hopefully I've answered your questions. We're coming up on time, David.
Well, in fact, we did
You didn't
complete
stump me, did
my.
you? You didn't stump me.
Well, I was told by
You softballed it.
well, I wanted to make sure that you had a good debut on the other side of the table, and I didn't create any awkward situations where it would boomerang right back at me, and I'd have to pick it up. So
Yeah,
I
I
appreciate
appreciate
the
that.
opportunity to
Well,
ask you some questions.
hopefully our viewers that watch this video series on a regular basis appreciate this change in format, and
I think they could vote with a
if they
thumbs
like
up
it,
or a
let us
thumbs
know.
down. A
Yeah,
thumbs up or a thumbs down. Or is
yeah.
there a thumbs down? There's
On
just a thumbs
YouTube
up.
channel. Yeah.
Okay.
We could make sure
Okay.
we'll check it next time.
Well, we'll give you a participation trophy. So we'll give
Okay.
everyone thumbs up here.
All right. Thank you, David. Until next month, everyone. This is Mark Fairhurst, David Bishop, partner of Brick Meets Click. You know where to find him. You know where to find me. Have a great month, and we'll see you in August.